So with that said, let's get the candidates up here. Let's start with Ohio Secretary of State Frank Larose. Former Army Green Beret, the Army's 101st Airborne, and Ohio Senator. State Senator Matt Dolan. Lawyer from Case Western Reserve School of Law, former state representative and minority owner of the Cleveland Guardians/Indians. Thank you. Bernie Moreno, Ohio businessman, a legal immigrant from Colombia, running multiple highly successful companies, employing hundreds of people in Ohio and other states. Yeah. It's not COVID, don't worry. I'm not gonna. Don't tell. Does light work? Anybody got a light bulb? I don't need it. All right, rules for tonight's forum. So the purpose of tonight's forum is to inform you and voters about the qualifications and leadership ability of the candidates in the 2024 Republican primary for U.S. Senator from Ohio. Voters need to know where you guys stand on policy, how you will lead, and your ability to get things done in the disaster that is Washington, D.C. Tom made sure to spell disaster in capital letters here for me, too. So, with that in mind, we're going to ask you to adhere to these simple rules. No personal attacks. Tell us about you and your ideas. Answers to questions, 2 to 3 minutes for each candidate. Please answer directly. Get to the point of the matter. I do have the right to stop you if you're going too long. Matter of fact, I got the phone with the timer right there. Each candidate will have an opportunity to answer each question in rotating order from left to right, and each candidate will have 60 seconds at the end of questions for a closing statement. So, with that said, debts and deficits. As of September of 2023, the national debt stood at over $33 trillion. This staggering amount equates to about $94,000 per U.S. citizen. In 2021, the Congressional Budget Office reported that discretionary spending was $1.6 trillion, $895 billion in non-defense, $742 billion in defense spending. The CBO also reported that 2021 mandatory spending, things Congress cannot change without changing the law, was $4.8 trillion. That $4.8 trillion is primarily Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest. Things that nobody wants to touch. In fact, former President Trump has said these items will not be reduced or changed if he is reelected. The problem is the total revenue into the Treasury. A record number was $4 trillion, $800 billion less than the mandatory spending alone. So in Washington, we clearly have a spending problem. So here's the first question. Is Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security reforms off the table for reductions to try and balance the budget? And if so, how do you balance the budget? Bernie, you were first.
All right, that answers the which left. All right, well, first of all, thank you all for being here. For the other guys in the room, this does not count as Saturday date night. But in my case, Bridget, this does. So if you could check that off the list. But debt is obviously something that is going to bankrupt this country. In fact, you can actually make the case that we're in effect bankrupt now. We've added $1 trillion in debt every single month for the last few months since the debt ceiling deal was done. They did the following. Imagine you give your kid an American Express black card, and the solution is to remove the credit limit. And that's basically what we did. The problem we have in D.C. is that the most bipartisan thing to do is to start an endless war and to spend money. But if we went back to 2019 spending levels, which is what we should do, and matched it up with today's revenue, we would actually be able to balance our budget. The problem we have is when you're a career politician, when all you've done is be a career politician, you have no experience ever cutting spending. There isn't one example that you'll see from anybody on this stage who's served in office where they've actually cut spending. They'll talk about cutting taxes, but all that is moving from one bucket to the other. In business, you don't have that luxury. When I came to Cleveland 20 years ago to buy a tiny little failing dealership, I turned that dealership into a giant company and built a lot of dealerships. Now, I never bought the good ones. I couldn't afford them. Every single dealership I bought was a failing dealership, much like DC is basically a failing system. But what I had to do is figure out how to make the proper priorities, what needed to be cut, what needed to be kept, and what we needed to invest in. In terms of your direct question, Social Security is money that we paid into the government that the government owes us back. Now, what we have done is in Medicaid is that we've expanded it so that basically everybody's eligible for that. And that's what we got to get back to, a rational reason where we have to have people in the workforce, not incentivizing them not to work and taking people off those roles. And lastly, and this is really important, as somebody who built a technology company with Shane Bigelow, my partner, who's saving state governments, sadly not Ohio, but West Virginia, we're saving them tens of millions of dollars because we know how to make government more efficient. Government has never, ever approached this and said, how do we do more with less? It's always, how do we do less with more and more and more? And that's what's got to stop. That's why you need an outsider who's actually somebody from the business world in D.C.
Matt?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. First, I want to acknowledge the Batchelder family. I had the great honor of serving with Bill. And I also had the honor of serving with another fallen Medina, Chuck Calvert. And I served with him in the House, and he represented the finest of Ohio, and he represented Medina extremely well. So it's been a tough year for Medina politics, but you had two good men. And the prodigy of Bill Batchel and Chuck Calvert is serving Ohio very well today. So the best way to tackle the debt and deficits in Washington is to get economic growth, economic activity, get people back to work, bring skilled manufacturing back to America, make sure that the economy is growing. I helped do that in Ohio. I have cut taxes, I have cut business taxes, I have made this an environment for growth, less regulations, which means this, is that the time I've been in the legislature, every year our revenues go up, yet we have cut taxes and reduced regulations, which means we are allowed then to be strategic in our spending to make Ohio better. But every single one of my budgets was balanced. You never spend more than your revenues. You all do it at home. We do it in Columbus. I want to go to Washington and reenact that. This is how you get growth going. The Democrats spent $1.7 trillion more in the last fiscal year than our revenues. We have to attack that. The only way our debt's going down is to bring those deficits down annually. Now, we went through a lot of what the money is spent on. And let's face it, it's 5 areas. It's Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, military, and our debt service. And our debt service is creeping up to be one of the top expenditures of your dollars. So to have a discussion about spending, yes, we're going to have to recognize we have to reform these entitlements. Now understand what that means. I look around this room and nobody here should sweat that they're going to lose their benefits because we can enact reforms. But look at the front table here. See these young people? I want to make sure that they're not fretting because if our generation does nothing, we are not just bankrupting our country, we are just crushing their economic activity, their economic growth, and their prosperities. Look, I'll give you an example. I'm the only one on this stage who understands how Medicaid works. I've done 4 state budgets. I know federal government, I know exactly what I would change to give the powers to the states so you can provide the necessary services to those who need it, and you can do it in a much more efficient and cost savings way. The other way, I look around this room, I'm sorry, but I bet there's some Medicaid recipients out here. How many of you had to file for Plan A? Then you had to do Plan B. Then you had to do Plan D. I mean, this is how crazy the federal government has gotten. That you bring somebody into Washington who has private and public sector experience like me, and you go there and you make the systems more efficient. You fulfill our society contract to each other, but you run it more efficiently and effectively. That saves money. It does 2 things. It provides the benefits, and it protects the future of these young people right here in the front row.
Frank?
Thanks so much to the Batchelder family. Thank you much to the Medina County Republican Party and Tom for all of your hard work. And Bloomdaddy, thank you for that question. It's perhaps appropriate that we start for this question because this is one of these areas where too many people are not paying attention to this. And there is a bipartisan spending problem in Washington, D.C. It seems like one thing that Republican and Democratic insiders believe in is spending more of other people's money. You talked about a $33 trillion national debt. I was describing this to one of my daughters the other day. $33 trillion. $1 trillion is 1,000 million, 1,000 billion. And so when you think about what $33 trillion amounts to, we have created this unsustainable situation where we are passing off debt to the next generation. We have to do something about that. And again, we don't have a revenue problem in Washington, D.C. In fact, as a proportion of GDP, revenue is nearly at an all-time high. We have a spending problem. The problem is the federal government approaches almost every budget cycle when they actually do them as how much more are we spending this time? They don't start from zero-based budgeting and say, how can we justify every penny that this agency is spending? And you're right, the 5 big things that were just mentioned, those are the biggest drivers. Debt service alone, think about this, debt service alone is going to be more than the entire cost of the defense budget within the next few years. Just the money that we spend borrowing money is going to be more than the entire defense budget. So yes, programs like Social Security, programs like Medicaid are worth looking at, but you have to do it in a way that you don't impact current beneficiaries or those who are within a few decades of being beneficiaries. You've got to put it on a sustainable path for those that are not even yet paying into the system decades to come, because otherwise you're not going to have sustainable programs that they can rely on. And that's how you fix this issue and stop committing this generational theft that's occurring right now in Washington, D.C.
All right, gentlemen, if I'm trying to give you all the same amount of time, if you see me do this, that just means wrap up thoughts within 30 seconds. I didn't want to be rude by doing that. Now, Bernie, you're going to go first. It's not the second question. It's just a continuation. If each one of you could just answer yes or no to this question. Do you support a balanced budget amendment?
Absolutely.
Matt?
Yes.
Frank?
100%.
Okay. Second topic, Ukraine funding. Frank, you'll go first. Do you support Ukraine funding? If so, why? If not, why not?
I can tell you this, as a matter of priorities, not another penny until we secure our southern border. But then the most exceptional nation on earth can do things to make sure that the world is a safer place. And let's be very honest about this. This administration in Washington thinks that you fix everything by throwing more money at it. That is the biggest problem with the Biden administration. The Biden administration, instead of actually making sanctions work, instead of leaning on our allies around the world, like President Trump did, to make sure that these NATO allies are actually living up to their 2% commitment, this administration has let that slide. One of the biggest offenders is just 60 miles to our north across the lake in Canada. The Canadians are not bearing their share of the burden. A lot of other countries around the world are not bearing their share of the burden. But I've got a pretty simple pretty simple idea, that the world, but more importantly, America, is safer when America leads. It's not American strength that is destabilizing around the world. It is American weakness that causes instability around the world. If President Trump was in the White House, Putin would have never invaded Ukraine. And when President Trump is back in the White House, we will be able to end things like this by making sure that we're at the table. And by the way, not another penny to Ukraine also until there is a strategic plan and until there is an inspector general. And that is something that is shocking to me, that the Democrats have fought putting an inspector general there to make sure that these dollars are actually being spent wisely.
Matt?
Well, thank you. So I do support America helping out Ukraine. I do not support the way President Biden is doing it. Had I been in the Senate, I would have pushed for a mission. What is our goal? The goal should have been to push Russia back to 2022 boundaries. And then you can say, what ammunition, what aid, what weaponry do you need to achieve those goals? And the American public could see whether we are on track to achieve that. Ukraine is a national security interest to America. It controls 25% of the world's wheat. You want higher food prices? Do you want higher gas prices? Do you want our allies to have Russia at their border and deciding where they buy their gas and oil? If you want to talk to a farmer in Ohio and ask them whether Ukraine means anything to them, ask them how much they have been paying in fertilizer prices since this tragedy started. We all have seen what has happened in Israel by the terrorist Hamas and the horrendous things that have happened. That is happening right now in Ukraine, led by the monster Putin. Look, everyone wants to say Trump was strong, and he was. And you all applauded when Trump kept Putin out of the Ukraine, and you should have. But what we're not asking ourselves is why didn't Putin come in? Because Trump knew Putin going into Ukraine is a national security nightmare for America. That's why he was so strong. We do need a stronger president back in the White House. And as far as oversight, in my world, every dollar should have oversight. Whether that dollar is going to Ukraine or Medina, our responsibility is to protect your taxpayers. So every dollar should be oversight. But we have an interest to be a leader in this world, to be an economic leader, to be a leader of strength and freedom, and that's what we need to do.
Bernie, do you support Ukraine funding? If so, why? And if not, why not?
So let me answer crystal clear. Absolutely no more money for Ukraine, period, unqualified. And if you notice, by the way, they didn't give an example of when they cut spending, when they're in their 30 plus years of elected office. They didn't give one example where they lowered spending, not one. Frank, as I mentioned,
cut $1 billion from the bureaucracy of state government.
Spending, Matt. Since you've been in state government, spending's gone up 50%. The budget, it costs 50% more today to run Ohio.
And not one penny over revenues.
Hold on.
Not one more penny over revenues. That's a perfect politician answer.
Bernie, stick to the question.
No,
please.
hold on 1 second. How many of you think you pay too little taxes in Ohio? Raise your hand, please. If you think your taxes are too low. So the fact that you're confiscating more money from Ohioans, but by law, because you can't actually print money and spend more than that, you want us to thank you. I don't think so. So anyway, moving on to Ukraine. Listen, at the end of the day, and Frank, 2 weeks ago you said you would give money to Ukraine. It wasn't qualified in the southern border. It was if we had oversight. Here's the deal. That money for Ukraine is going to pay teachers. It's going to pay Ukrainian public officials. It's being paid to God knows what oligarchs are laundering that money. I'm sorry. I'm asking for you to elect me to be the senator for the United States of America and not for Ukraine. And what a world leader does is he ends the killing and ends the war. And that's what we should be doing.
All right, second part to this question, Matt, I'm going to start with you. Several Republican members of Congress defended Ukraine funding by saying it's in our national economic interest. We import 1.3 billion of items required for American products like pig iron that only come from Ukraine. If Ukraine falls to Russia, those imports needed will cost much more than they do now. So there's a national economic interest here. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I completely agree with that. There is a national economic interest that will affect every one of us individually. There is a global interest economically that's at stake here. Look, we want to become energy independent again. We want Ohio to start drilling and let it flow. If Russia is sitting on Polish borders and our allies have to face that, where do you think they're going to turn to buy their oil? Because they're going to look to America and go, you guys weren't there when we wanted you there. The other factor in this play is we have China just watching America's resolve. And if China doesn't think there's any consequences to a bully going into a sovereign nation, we are going to have to deal with China again. These are the things that we have to stand up to be. There is an interest. Eventually, we're going to be putting American boots on the ground. And I have a nephew in the Air Force. I have a nephew in the Marines. And I'd like them not to see a hot war. And in order not to see a hot war, we better make sure that Ukraine has what it needs to not only fight the enemy, but folks, when you fight a war, you need supply chain. A lot of our aid is going to make sure that they can feed their soldiers, they can house their soldiers. There's a lot of complications here. And it will be felt back on us in our economics if we don't stop Putin's aggression and send a message to China, you're not going anywhere.
Frank?
It is very important that the Ukrainian freedom fighters win, and it's very important that Russia lose. And this kind of isolationist idea that we're just going to hide on our continent and pretend that the problem's going to go away is not what you get to do when you are the world's sole superpower, if we want to stay as a superpower. You better believe that Xi Jinping is watching what's happening in Ukraine as it relates to his ambitions for Taiwan. You better believe that the mullahs in Iran are watching what happens here as it relates to their ambitions to wipe Israel off the map. And by the way, it is Iranian-backed Hamas terrorists who launched the largest single attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust 1 week ago today. The world is an unstable place right now because of the weakness of Joe Biden. And listen, nobody wants to write a blank check to Ukraine. Nobody wants to send money to Ukraine that is going to be wasted by oligarchs or unaccountable people. But for America to sit back and refuse to lead is also not acceptable. We have to engage in the world in a way that is in our strategic national interest. And making sure that Russia cannot continue to invade sovereign countries is in our national interest.
Bernie?
When you're the leader, I'm not suggesting, Frank or Matt, that we not be the leader of the world. But when you're a leader, what you do in a situation like this is you end the killing. You drive towards peace. That's what we should be doing. There's no peace plan. That's what disappoints me about my Republican friends that are this neocon that want more endless wars. Listen, we should be figuring out how to solve the crisis to have a peaceful settlement. And let me tell you what China's watching. Here's what China's watching. A woke military in which we're not teaching our Marines how to be tough fighters. We're teaching them how to be LGBTQ and DEI and all that nonsense, right? And we're almost out of ammunition and munitions. So if you're China, you're sitting there going, wait a second, let me get this straight. You're going to send, and by the way, what is the definition of win, Frank? Matt defined it as the 2022 borders. Matt, that's not what Ukraine says. Ukraine wants Crimea back, right? So you're saying.
I know what I'm saying.
No,
I know what Americans should.
No, I got you. I got you. Frank's just saying win, whatever that means. Win to me is we get a peaceful settlement. But here's what they're watching. An endless war in Ukraine that's costing us a depleted military, this potential crisis in the Middle East, a potential crisis in Taiwan, and by the way, this walk and chew gum story, we're being invaded at our southern border by 8 million people over the last 2.5 years. How do we fight a four-pronged war? So yeah, if you're China, you're cheering for the people who want to blow up all over the world. Like I said, let me just say this last thing. If you want to be a bipartisan member of the United States Senate, vote for a lot of spending and a lot of endless wars, and you will be the queen of the ball.
Since we're talking about money and we're talking about funding, let's go to Israel. Frank, are you up first? Okay. Do you support funding Israel? And other than the line that they are a democracy and an ally, why should we support Israel? What are the benefits to the United States?
Well, first of all, let's start from the very beginning. It says in the book of Genesis, this promise to Abram, who became Abraham, I will bless those who bless thee and curse those who curse thee. This is what my faith tells me. But even if you're not a person of faith, this is our most important ally in that region. This is an important economic partner of ours. And so 100% the United States of America will stand with Israel. Let's talk about the resolve. Thank you. Let's talk about the resolve that we're going to need to have. Because when these bloodthirsty Hamas animals broke through the border, and yes, by the way, we don't even have a border wall to break through. They took a bulldozer and broke through a border wall. So 100% we need to secure the southern border because we've got terrorists, people on the terrorist watch list are coming across our border. When these bloodthirsty terrorists broke through that border wall and started going on a murderous rampage, they were going into a village where I was just 8 months ago, a place called Kfar Aza. I was getting texts from people who were there. And what happened in Israel is absolutely unacceptable. We're going to need to have resolve. Let me tell you, as somebody who has served in urban combat, there's nothing more ugly than urban combat. It's the worst case scenario. The worst of the worst case scenarios is doing urban combat in a place like Gaza, where it has been set up to have tunnels underground and booby traps above ground. It is going to be a nightmare. And when the Palestinians start their propaganda campaign, which is coming, they're going to show dead civilians. And the Israelis are going to work really hard to prevent that. But listen, the Israelis, yes, they use rockets to protect their civilians, but Hamas uses civilians to protect their rockets. And so we're going to have resolve to let Israel conduct the kind of combat operations that they're going to have to conduct so that they can wipe out the ability of Hamas to continue bringing war and bringing murder to innocent men, women, and children throughout Israel. And so, yes, we will stand with Israel. We will continue to fund the Iron Dome system. We will be there to give them the support that they need. And you know what else we'll do? We need to go back to President Trump's maximum pressure effort, which put the responsibility right where it belonged, and that is Iran. Iran funds and Iran equips Hamas and Hezbollah. They were the people equipping the people that I was fighting in southern Iraq. Iran is the single biggest exporter of terror, and for Joe Biden to give them $6 billion a couple weeks ago is absolutely the height of irresponsibility. Should have never happened.
Matt?
So what you want from a U.S. Senator is somebody who's transparent with you and consistent in thought and practice. I am not going to appease Putin, and I am not going to appease Hamas or Iran. So yes, the United States is going to defend its ally. And yes, we've been doing it by providing the Patriot missiles. And yes, if they need additional ammunition, we should help them. But where we really need to help them is to stand up to Iran, to make sure that they know if Iran's going to spread this war, that if Hezbollah is going to come from the north, or if Iran's going to start shooting missiles over Syria, that they're going to be met with a quick and severe response. Look, we want to be the leader in the world, right? Everyone up here said it. Well, look, I'm the only one here who's consistent. This is the greatest country on the face of the earth, and we can take our challenges head on. We can secure the border, and yeah, we can defend Israel. Somehow the logic doesn't, when we're talking about Ukraine, somehow we have to decide we can only do one thing at a time. No, this is what I mean. America needs to be strong. You need to have strong advocates in the Senate that can define goals. Why are we in Ukraine? What's important to Americans to be in Israel? Execute on it and make sure the world remains safe so that we all have an individual opportunity to grow. And our country is seen as has more allies than enemies. We're heading the other direction right now.
Bernie?
So we support Israel by doing the following. Expedite the weaponry that they've already paid for, that they've already ordered. Let's expedite that and get that to them. Israel doesn't need America help to do what they need to do in Hamas, other than for us to give them the space to do it. If you notice what Sherrod Brown and the other Democrats are calling for, is immediately while the fighting started last Saturday, they were calling for Israel to do a ceasefire. Israel needs the space, not just to protect themselves by going into Gaza. They need to end Hamas. End it like we ended ISIS. That's what they need to do. So the best thing we can do is expedite the weaponry that they've already ordered, give them the space to do it, shout out clearly to these lunatics on the left that are saying equivalency between what's going on in Hamas and the Palestinians and what's going on in Israel. They have this equivalency argument that's completely false. Number 4, we need to be a loud voice against anti-Semitism. And Matt, I hope that one of the things you do when you get back in the Senate is make sure there's not one university in Ohio that allows the BDS movement, that is giving air to Palestinian hate on campus, like what we're seeing at Ohio State. And that you go out there and affirmatively do this. Not just speak out. I want to see action. Because anti-Semitism
Senate Bill 83, Bernie.
What's that?
Already done. Senate Bill 83.
Well, you know what? Look at your board of trustees in some of our universities. Where are they?
Read the bill.
Did you get it passed?
We passed it out of the Senate.
Well, there you go. That's what you get with a supermajority in Columbus.
All right, let's move on to border security. We've already talked about this. A couple of the gentlemen brought this up. Bernie, you're going to go first. So I want to go a little bit deeper in this area than do you just support border security, because obviously the three of you do. But do you believe anchor babies are citizens? Do you support letting them stay in the United States? Bernie.
You know, as I said earlier, I came to the U.S. legally myself, my 5 brothers, my sister, my mom and dad. What we're allowing happen at the southern border is a complete disgrace. It's actually treason. I don't think that's too strong of a word to say what's allowed down there. Birthright citizenship needs to be ended. I've called for this months ago. It's not in our Constitution. That was about slavery, not about illegal immigration. There is no jurisdiction over that person when they have a baby here. We need to end that, but we have to go much further. We have to make English our official language. That's what unites us, to bring people together. We have to deport every single person that came here while Joe Biden was president because there's been no vetting. We need to suspend all of our asylum laws until December of 2025 because we can't handle the surge of invasion in our border. And we have to make certain that going forward, any person claiming asylum has to come through a legal port of entry. If somebody crosses into America illegally, not only are they immediately returned, but forfeit their right for asylum for life. And then finally, and this is really important, and I'm going to play a role in this, we have to go to Mexico. And we have to be careful with the extreme neocons in the Republican Party that are going to make Mexico elect a very anti-American president. We have to go to Mexico to explain to them, you're our largest trading partner of legal goods. Not China, it's Mexico. You're also our largest illegal trading partner. You're bringing fentanyl, which you're getting from China, into our communities and killing 100,000+ Americans. You have to make a choice. Colombia made that choice in the 80s. And when they do make that right choice, we declare the drug cartels foreign terrorist organizations, and we use our special operators and our military to wipe the drug cartels off of the face of the earth.
Matt?
So I don't expect much daylight amongst the three of us on this issue. The problem with this issue is twofold. It's Sherrod Brown, who I've listened to last December say that he thinks border security immigration is only a far-right issue. That's when he travels Ohio, he doesn't hear about it. Well, I'm telling you, he doesn't travel the same Ohio I do. He doesn't talk to sheriffs and law enforcement officers where we see record fentanyl, record human trafficking right here in Ohio. Or he didn't meet Rich in Geauga County or Joe in Columbiana County who lost children directly to fentanyl. This is a border crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis, an economic crisis. We all know it needs to be fixed, but I said two things. If we don't send people to Washington who actually know what they're doing, can bring professional and private experience, it doesn't get done. There are four things that Trump did. He's built a wall. He put technology. He gave border authority to the people, to the Border Patrol to act like law enforcement officers, and he had to remain in Mexico. So you didn't come across the border until you got officially asylum. And yet not when we controlled the House and we controlled the Senate as Republicans, they never put it into law. And it got wiped away by one stroke of a pen by Joe Biden. So there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk. But when you look at my record is one of execution. It's the one to go, and we're going to secure the border. And we have to do that first. We have got to secure the border. All the other issues that come with immigration need to be addressed. But look what's happened in our past. Everyone's got ideas, and it's 8 or 10 different issues we're going to talk about, and nothing happens. Securing our border, knowing who's coming into our country and what they're bringing into our country. We got to stop the flow of fentanyl. We got to stop the human trafficking. That has to be issue one when I get to the Senate.
Frank?
So this is an issue where there should be a lot of agreement, and I think there is, but the question is who has the courage and the experience to actually get it done? There is a invasion occurring at our southern border. We know that. There are drugs and crime coming across this border. There are people on the terrorist watch list coming across this border. So yes, of course, job one is that we close the border. That means building the wall. That also means, though, that we need to fire the 87,000 new IRS agents and hire 87,000 new Border Patrol agents. That also means that we need to develop intelligence on both sides with sensors and detectors so that we know what's going on. That also means that we need to clarify that these Mexican drug cartels are foreign terrorist organizations so that we can use the full power of the federal government to go after them. Because think about this. 200 people a day dying from fentanyl that is precursor chemicals from China mixed up in Mexico, smuggled across this border. 200 people a day is like a fully loaded 737 passenger plane crashing. If one of those crashed every day, we would ground every aircraft until we figured out what was going on, but this administration has done nothing. It is the It is the Chinese and it is the Mexicans that have to bear the responsibility for this, and starting by classifying those cartels as foreign terrorists is a good start. The next thing that we need to talk about is this demand problem that we have. And it is, as you started with the question, saying that birthright citizenship will not be extended to anybody who broke the law coming into this country. And you're also not going to get government benefits if you broke the law coming into this country. And yes, of course, if you didn't come through a legal port of entry, you're not eligible for asylum. The asylum system in general needs to be completely revamped. We need to fix this, and this administration, the Biden administration, is not serious about it. When I get to Washington, D.C. as your next United States Senator, I will be deadly serious about this because I served there. This is not a photo op or a field trip for me. I volunteered to be a part of a counter-narcotics task force in 1999 as a young soldier with the 101st Airborne Division. We took cocaine out of the diapers of infant children that were being brought across this border. I know exactly what we need to do, and that's what I'm going to do for each and every one of you.
All right, second part of the question, so we'll save the same order. Bernie, you go first. FAIR, Federation for American Immigration Reform, estimates there's about 16.8 illegals here in the country as of right now. Do you believe they should all be sent home? If so, what happens to the employer that needs that employee? How do we find them? How do we send them back? Or should they have a pathway to citizenship?
Well, we've been told that number of 16 million for the last 30 years. So I think it's a number is much, much higher. What I do know is we got to start with the people who came here during Biden. Like I said earlier, we got to deport the people who came here during Joe Biden's time. If they have a court date by January of 24, they can stay for that court date. But after that, they got to be deported. And Frank, I don't think you meant to say, Frank, in fairness, I don't think you meant to say hire 87,000 new Border Patrol agents, because that would be an incredible increase in our federal government, because we don't need more Border Patrol agents. What we need is better policies. In fact, Brandon Judd, the head of the Border Patrol Union, endorsed my campaign because he himself says we don't need more Border Patrol agents. This is the guy who runs the Border Patrol Agent Union. What he's saying is we need better policies. The asylum laws don't need to be completely revamped. It's literally one sentence. It says any natural person can claim asylum in America. Are you ready for this? Parentheses, whether at a legal port of entry or otherwise. That needs to be changed. Only at a legal port of entry. And by the way, if you enter through a non-legal port of entry, you disqualified for life. That's what we changed it. That could be an easy legislation.
Let me follow that up, though. Would you be in favor of rounding up illegal immigrants who have been here for, say, 15, 20 years?
If somebody broke our law to get into our country, they cannot be rewarded by staying here. There's no more amnesty, no more backdoor amnesty. We were sold this under Reagan. In the 80s, we were sold this under Reagan. Hey, we're going to provide amnesty to this certain group of people and everything would be fine. That is absolutely nothing that I would ever possibly support.
Matt?
So again, this is talk. You have to secure the border. That's number one. All these other issues need to be addressed. But we talk about them, and what is the baseline? Our border is wide open. So we have to secure the border. That we can talk about everything else. We also have to recognize that legal immigration in our country not only is a historical norm, but is a huge part of our economics. You know, if you spend any time in Northeastern Ohio or Northwest Ohio, you know that they rely on legal immigration for their nurseries, their wineries, their farms. You go to Southeast Ohio, you know they rely on legal immigration for their farms, for their hospitality. So we have to have a meaningful discussion about who can stay, who can provide value to the United States of America, remain legal. But again, how often have you heard these conversations? It all comes down to, are you willing to execute on the fundamental thing we have to do in this country, and that's secure our border. And it can be bipartisan. I was down at the border, and I drove 10 miles with this border. It wasn't even a border patrol because they're not even doing their job. It was the Cochise County Sheriff's Office from Arizona. And he stopped the car, and he says, you know that wall we've been driving by for the last 10 miles? That was built under the Obama administration. So this can be bipartisan. You got to get Biden out of the White House, because I don't know what his motive is, but there's not a single valid motive for what's happening. That's where we start. Stop the flow of illegal people and illegal substance, and people want to do danger to our country, secure our border.
So Matt, just so I'm certain here, somebody who's been here 15, 20 years illegally, as long as they are providing and contributing, you are for a pathway to citizenship for them?
No, I'm saying that is a discussion we have to have.
Okay.
But when you throw all that discussion in, just go back and look at all the immigration bills of the past. All that gets discussed, and what happens? The border remains open. So what I'm saying is, nope, we're securing the border. Let's stop the bleeding. You can't fix the patient until you stop the bleeding. That's what the guys could be number one.
Okay. Frank, I'll just start off with it. Do you round up 16.8 million people after you stop the bleeding at the border?
So again, we all agree on the border bleeding has to stop, right?
Yes.
It is not wise to reward lawlessness by giving people something. And so if you came during the chaos, the invasion of the Biden administration, yes, you will be deported. If you came here illegally, you will never be eligible for citizenship, never. But it's also important to recognize that immigration, when done legally, is a net positive for our country. Each of us are the sons and daughters of immigrants, or many of us are. And so when we have a merit-based immigration system where people can come here legally, learn our language, assimilate into our culture, work hard to live the American dream, that is a net positive for our country. We should have a merit-based immigration system, but only after we have a secure border.
All right. Who's first? Is it you, Matt, on this one? All right, we're going to go with Matt on this one. Shutting down the government. So Republicans shut down the government in 2012. It gained them nothing. CBO reported actually cost U.S. taxpayers more money to shut the government down and reopen it. All government employees still get paid. Their pay is just deferred. A lot of veterans live paycheck to paycheck, can't afford it being deferred. Republicans have also failed to pass all of the appropriations bills and a budget required to set spending levels, which is a regular order. Do you believe that should be done first before the government would be shut down?
Well, nobody wants to shut down a government, but if we're going to have a Democratic Party in the Senate and a Democratic-led White House that is not going to understand that they're spending $1.7 trillion more than what the revenues are bringing in, how else can we get their attention? Oh, I know. The Republicans in the House could pass a resolution that would say, let's cut government by 30%. This is what I mean by theater and talk and actually executing. All the chaos in Washington right now could have been avoided if the House of Representatives, if those Republicans didn't join with those Democrats to not vote to cut spending by 30%. Because then the discussion would have been, okay, America, do you want to go on this path of destruction that the Democrats continue to take us? Or do you want to rely on the Republican plan that says we are spending too much money, we need to cut it by 30%, and we can still fulfill our obligations at government? This is what's at play here. There's too much theater. There's way too much theater. These are difficult decisions that need to be made. And yet, if all you're trying to do is gain political points, get applause at events like this, we're just going to keep having this country be destroyed. We could have had a discussion that American people would have known that the Republican Party is for fiscal discipline, is for cutting the excess spending, is for a strong military, and for strength in the world. Instead, the Democrats are just sitting back watching us shoot each other in the foot.
Frank, would you be in favor of shutting down the government?
Governing by crisis is no way to run the world's most exceptional nation. And so for one thing, what we ought to be doing is the annual process that starts way back in the spring of deliberating on and passing budgets on time. And let me be clear about something. Nobody should relish the idea of shutting down the government. It is a bad thing to do. I'll tell you about an email I got 2 weeks ago from my military unit. I'm a reservist, and I got an email that said, hey, that training that you're supposed to be going to in a couple months, you may not get orders because we may not have a budget to fund those. I was just one of, I'm sure, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that were getting emails like that. So shutting down the government is not a good thing. But let me be clear, it absolutely also has to be a tool in our toolbox that we're willing to use if this administration refuses to take border security serious and refuses to take runaway spending serious. If they won't take those two things seriously, then we need to be able to threaten and maybe even execute on a government shutdown. But here's the way we should do it. We should do it smartly. Instead of continuing to lean into the same punches the Democrats throw, what we ought to be doing is passing a border security bill, putting it on Biden's desk, and daring him to veto it. We ought to be passing a bill that cuts the budgets and putting it on Biden's desk and daring him to veto it. Because if he does, he owns the shutdown.
Bernie?
You know, one of the things you learn in the business world is how to negotiate. It's what you do every day. I would never take anything off the table. That would be an insane thing to do. And I think what happens is, as Republicans, we often take things off the table, and Democrats play us as a result of that. So, of course, nobody wants to shut down the government. That's obviously no way to run things. I agree with what we just said there. But you would never take it off the table if it's what has to happen to protect the sovereignty of the country, to protect the security of the country, to protect the fiscal health of this country. But I want to go back to the border issue. That is extraordinarily personal to me. When I hear Republicans talk about immigration the same way Democrats do, listen, we're not going to beat Democrats by being more like Democrats. When you conflate legal immigration in the same breath, same sentence, same conversation as illegal immigration, you're playing into the hands of the Democrats and the left. Legal immigration is a totally different topic. Totally different topic. The answer is you cannot have amnesty. That's not a difficult conversation. But Republicans refuse to say it. And Matt, the reason President Trump
to say it.
The reason President Trump didn't get these things put into law is because he went into 2017 thinking anybody with an R next to their name was an ally. Instead, what did he get? The Mitt Romneys of the world, the John McCains of the world, the Republicans who pretend to be Republican when they want your vote, and then go to D.C. and do the exact opposite.
That's theater. That's a applause line. It's not accurate.
Which part is not accurate? President Trump didn't fight against Republicans? Are you kidding me?
We didn't get it done because Republicans fight with Republicans. That's why we didn't get it done.
So this illegal immigration issue is a complex one. Both administrations throughout the years have failed, Republican and Democrat. So if you're going to round up 16, 20, 30 million illegals who have been here for 15 or 20 years, the costs of that, going house to house, raiding homes, is that something that the three of you would be okay with? Who wants to go on that one?
Look, these are the guys that want to do that. I'm saying secure the border.
I didn't say that. And it's not realistic to take 20 million consumers out of the economy, to take 20 million workers out of the economy. What I said is that if you came here illegally, you will never get United States citizenship and you will never get government benefits.
So amnesty.
So again, they're for amnesty. I'm not. That's the
How's
bottom
that
line.
No.
Because when you can't with one hand say there's only one path to America, the legal path, the path I took. You can't say that. And then on the other hand say, but if you did, you ran out the clock, so I guess you're okay.
Bernie,
Because-
if you're
no, Matt,
unfortunate
please,
enough to get
20 million
elected,
people.
Matt,
this
please
is
stop-
the same
please
talk
stop
we've
interrupting.
had for
Matt,
years.
Matt, listen.
Secure the border. He wants to talk about all these other shiny objects, and what keeps happening? More and more people come over that border. More and more drugs get into our country. More terrorists are going to get into our country. That's why if you don't stay laser focused on what the original problem is and fix that, everything else is the same talk and the same inefficiency that we've had for years.
Go ahead,
All
Bernie.
right, as I was saying, Mike Pence, is that the way you do this, Matt, secure the border doesn't mean crap. I'm sorry. There's nobody here who said, wait, no, I'm for an insecure border. Of course we have to secure the border. The question is, what are we doing? So let me go through it again. We changed our immigration laws to say you can't come here illegally. Number one, easy to do. The drug cartels, foreign terrorist organizations. You finish the wall. You make it clear that there's only one way to America. But if you tell people, what people in other countries are hearing is when they hear people like you, and you're right, Republicans do fight Republicans because they side with Democrats. Okay, that's what happens, right? So when you go in there and say, hey, you ran out the clock, so we're going to have some backdoor amnesty deal. You know what they're saying? Hey, listen, if I get there quick enough, if I put my money with these drug cartel members, which the drug cartel members tell these poor people that they can do this, and they're sold a bill of goods, That's what encourages more people to come into the country
This is
legally.
double talk.
All right, Frank, last
Everybody said up here that we want to secure the border first.
How?
Everybody said that.
How?
The way I just told you, building a wall, increasing border patrol, having intelligence gathering on both sides, making sure that we get away from birthright citizenship, making sure that if you come here illegally, you're not going to have any benefits or ever have a path to citizenship. And yes, deporting the people that came during the Biden invasion, but you're not going to round up 20 million people out of this country and ship them home. It's not even logistically possible, and you know that.
All right, so amnesty.
It's not amnesty.
So-
it's not.
That's exactly what it is. That's what happened during the 80s with Reagan. And what people hear around the world is that if you break the law, how about this, Frank? If you're at line at Dunkin' Donuts like I am every single morning, like I had to wait, and I'm in line, and you reward people who break the line, I am deeply offended by the fact that this country rewards people who cut in front of the millions of
And
people
that's why
who are waiting.
that's why you can't reward that.
You're rewarding them by allowing them to stay.
let's move on. I smacked the hornet's nest there. Okay, last question. Who's I've lost track. Who's up? Frank, are you up? Sure. Okay. Last question. You're asking for Republicans to vote for you in the primary. Some would say if you worked with a Democrat, you're not a true Republican. If you are successful and win the general election, will you be the type of senator that will cross over the aisle and get things accomplished, even if that means working with a Democrat?
I think my priorities are very clear. We need to cut spending. We need to grow our economy. We need to secure the border. We need to restore parents' rights. We need to have a strong military. And so if there are Democrats that want to work with me on those things, I'll work with them. But I can tell you this, I'm not interested in giving in to the Democrats like too many Republicans have done. And I'm happy to say that I'm the only person up here who's a lifelong Republican. I will never be a Democrat, and I'm not going to work with them unless they're willing to come to our side.
So I've had the great fortune of being the finance chair in Ohio 4 times, and each of my budgets has been labeled the most conservative at the time. This last one got labeled the most conservative budget, not just by people in Ohio, but by conservative groups all throughout the state. Because what you do is you execute on things that are important to each one of us. Yet in that same year, I was voted the most bipartisan legislature in Columbus. The way you deal with Democrats is you put Republicans in the majority so that the Republicans are driving the agenda. And you bring, if any Democrat wants to drive the agenda with us and it works, fine. But for too long in Washington, we're losing. We lost in 18, we lost in 20, we lost in 22. And as a result, we don't have the pen. That's what we need to do. We need to win. We need to beat Sherrod Brown. You need to get back in that majority. And you need folks like me who can set an agenda and see it all the way through and have it impact our country.
Bernie?
We're going to take the House, we're going to take the Senate, and President Trump is going to be back in the White House. In that scenario, and God, I hope and pray, and I know we will, because we're going to have a great freshman class next year. You know, J.D. Vance is endorsing this race. We're going to follow that model. We don't need to work with Democrats. The Democrats don't work with us. We're going to have a majority in the House. We're going to have a majority in the Senate. We're going to have a president in the White House. We're going to get conservative stuff done, and we're actually going to do the things that we say we're going to do. Every Republican campaigns at the same issues. Everyone does. And yet when they go down there as Republicans in the majority, they cave to the Democrats. Now, on the other hand, the Democrats campaign on the things that they believe in, which is, by the way, totally crazy. Let's just be honest. This is not a normal party. This is a party that's gone completely off the deep end. And what did they do when they took office? When they took the election from Trump in 2020? What did they do in 2021? They went right in there and rammed everything through. They put the Republicans in the basement and rammed their agenda through. Now, if you think that the right answer to that question is after you work your tail off and you get me elected as your senator and Trump back in the White House and we keep the House of Representatives, that the answer is for us to go over to the Democrats and go, what do you guys want to do? No, we're going to get the things that we say we're going to get done as Republicans, as constitutional conservatives. That's what I want to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, how about a nice round of applause for Frank Larose, Matt Dolan, and Bernie Moreno. And listen to the Bloomdaddy Show, 3 to 7, WTAM 1100. Tom, where are you? You got my paycheck? All right, good. Oh, I thought I was done. No, I'm not going to get paid. All right, each candidate gets 60 seconds. Bernie, why don't you go first?
I hope what you saw tonight is a contrast between two insiders, two career politicians, nice enough guys. I think they mean well. And Frank, obviously honor your service in our military. I think our country's better for it and for your service. We all honor that. But this is a really important election. And if we're going to change Washington, D.C., you can't send people to Washington, D.C. that are exactly the same as the kind of people we've been sending there for a generation. We got to send outsiders. We got to send business people, people who know how to actually get things done, who've built businesses, who understand accountability, and who are going to go down there clear-eyed and know, and this is really important, that in a fixed period of time, in my case, 2 terms, I'm coming home. This is not my career.
Matt?
Thank you, Bloomdaddy. Thank you for the party. Look, I want everyone to know that my focus has always been, whether it's been the private sector, public sector, to make Ohioans' lives better each and every day. That's the focus, because I want these young people to know that the American dream is alive and well, and it's our generation's responsibility to make sure it stays that way. This election is going to be about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'm going to go to Washington and fight for the sanctity of life, for law enforcement, for our military, for our veterans. Those values, those freedoms, those liberties, I don't want just to have them as Republicans. I want you to feel free as Americans to express that. And the pursuit of happiness. We're going to go back to what our founders wanted. Our founders wanted you as an individual to have your fate in your hands, free from all government constraints. That's what we can do. When we do that, Americans will feel secure. When America is secure, America is strong. Thank you for your attention tonight. Matt Dolan for U.S. Senate. Go to dolanforohio.com and you can learn a lot more about me. Thank you.
Frank.
Well, thanks again, everybody. Thanks to my beautiful wife, Lauren, for joining me this evening. It's been an honor to be with you. Reagan spoke about a time for choosing, and we as a party are going to be facing a time for choosing very soon, where it's going to be our responsibility to pick who Ohio's Republican nominee is going to be for U.S. Senate. I'd ask you, do you want somebody that can give you slick talk, or do you want somebody who is a battle-tested conservative, somebody who is proven? Do you want somebody who has a 100% pro-life voting record? I'm the only one on the stage with a 100% pro-life voting record. You want somebody with a 100% pro-Second Amendment voting record? I'm the only one. Or a 100% record on cutting taxes. I'm somebody who has a history of standing up for the things that Ohio conservatives care about and getting things done. So here's what I'm asking you. This is a year-long job interview. I'm sitting in front of my prospective employers tonight asking you to hire me for a very important job. And so I'm asking for your vote. But just as important, I'm asking for your prayers. The most important thing you could do for any candidate is to keep them in your prayers. And with your vote and with your prayers, I'm the one who's going to beat Sherrod Brown next year so we can take back the Senate majority and we can put this country back on track. God bless each and every one of you.
That concludes the event. Thanks, everybody, for coming out.